I still remember that day so clearly, like it's burned into my memory. I was riding my beat-up little delivery scooter through those winding, polished streets up in Beverly Hills, and honestly, it felt like I had taken a wrong turn into another world. Every house looked like a palace, bigger than the shopping mall back in my neighborhood, with fountains in the driveway and gates that probably cost more than my entire apartment. My scooter rattled and coughed the whole way, and I couldn't help but feel like the noise gave me away, like everyone behind those tall hedges and perfect lawns knew I didn't belong there. When I pulled up in front of this mansion with marble walls and those heavy black iron gates, my heart was racing so fast it almost drowned out the sound of the engine. I cut the motor, pulled off my helmet, and just stood there for a second, staring. The air smelled like trimmed grass and roses, nothing like the mix of gas fumes and fried food I was used to on my usual routes. I caught myself whispering, almost laughing under my breath. So this is how the other half lives. Not like us, that's for sure. I tried to smooth out my wrinkled FedEx jacket, as if that would make me look more professional, but deep down I felt like a kid playing dress-up. I rang the doorbell, expecting some kind of sleek security system to talk back to me, but instead, there was this long silence. Just as I started to wonder if maybe I should leave the package on the step, the door creaked open. Standing there was an older woman dressed in a plain black dress that looked more like a uniform than something she'd picked out herself. Her hair was pinned back so tightly it looked painful, and her face, it was tired, guarded. Without saying a word, she motioned me inside toward the wide hallway, then slipped away like a shadow. I stepped in carefully, my sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floor, and that's when I heard it. Voices, sharp, cutting voices drifting out from a door that was left just a little too open. A woman's tone, dripping with bitterness, snapped through the silence. "I told you we'll strip him bare, down to his last dollar. Do you hear me, Brandon?" Then came a man's low, mocking reply, smooth but nasty in a way that made my stomach twist. "Oh yes, baby. It'll all be exactly how you want it. I love watching you work. You're brilliant. He doesn't stand a chance." I froze where I stood, my breath caught in my throat. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but in that moment I knew I had just stumbled into something way bigger than a simple delivery job. The man's words were still echoing in my ears when I suddenly heard the sound of greedy kisses, messy and urgent, and something inside me twisted with discomfort because I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to hear any of this, yet before I could even step back, the door swung open and out came this tall, breathtaking blonde in a silk dress that clung to her body as if it had been poured onto her skin, her hair perfectly set, her perfume so thick and expensive it filled the hallway in an instant. And when her eyes landed on me, it was as if I was nothing more than an insect that had slipped inside her perfect world. She didn't waste a second before snapping her fingers, summoning the older woman in black, and her voice cut through the air with the kind of authority that only comes from years of being obeyed without question, sharp and commanding as she ordered, "Give this package to the courier. It must go straight into my husband's hands, and call me a premium car. My guest is leaving. I'll need a driver myself." And the woman lowered her head, her hands clasped together tightly as if to steady herself, her answer quiet, almost swallowed. "Yes, Mrs. Carter, of course." And in her downcast eyes, I caught a flicker of fear, a kind of silent plea that spoke louder than words, before Victoria Carter glided away down the hall with that practiced elegance of someone who believed the entire world revolved around her. When Mrs. Thompson returned to me, she carried the package as though it were a living thing, fragile and dangerous, and she held it out with hands that trembled just enough to make me notice. Her face pale, and her lips pressed so tight I thought she might break if she spoke too freely, and she whispered that I had to deliver it directly to Mr. Carter, only to him, that it was very important, and in her tone I heard something she wasn't saying out loud, something heavy and dangerous, and my own hands shook slightly as I accepted the envelope, its weight far greater than the few thin sheets of paper I knew were inside. I forced myself to ask where exactly I should go, my voice thinner than I wanted, and she leaned closer as if afraid someone else might be listening, telling me his office, the address already written on the front, that someone there would meet me, and that I should simply say, "I came from Mrs. Carter," and her eyes lingered on mine for a heartbeat longer, filled with a warning she couldn't speak, and I nodded even as my chest tightened, reminding myself over and over that this was just another delivery. Yet a deep unease had already rooted itself inside me, whispering that nothing about this day was going to be ordinary. Mrs. Thompson's voice was low, almost trembling, when she told me the address was already written on the package, that Mr. Carter's assistant would be waiting, and all I had to do was say I came from his wife. She pressed the envelope into my hands like it was carrying the weight of her own guilt, and I saw something flicker in her expression, a look of fear mixed with shame, the kind of look that stays with you long after the moment is over. I wanted to ask her more, to press her about what exactly was going on in that house, but the words caught in my throat. I told myself I wasn't part of this, that my job was just to deliver and leave, nothing more, even as my stomach tightened with unease. I strapped my helmet back on and pulled into traffic, the scooter rattling beneath me as I headed downtown, weaving between cars and listening to the city roar in my ears. The farther I got from Beverly Hills, the more I tried to shake off what I'd heard, but my mind kept replaying those cruel voices, those kisses, that perfume still clinging to my jacket. By the time I reached Manhattan's business district, the glass towers rising above me like cold giants, my nerves were frayed, yet I told myself again and again that all I had to do was hand over the package. Still, when I parked outside that gleaming skyscraper with its mirrored walls, I caught my reflection in the glass and hardly recognized the tired, anxious girl staring back. Inside, the air was cool and sharp, smelling faintly of polished marble and expensive cologne. The receptionist didn't even blink when I explained I had a delivery for Mr. Carter. She simply picked up the phone, murmured something, and waved me toward the private elevator. My sneakers squeaked against the floor as I stepped inside, and the silence of the elevator pressing upward made me feel trapped in a box with my own doubts. When the doors finally opened at the top floor, I stepped into a wide, hushed lobby, and waiting there was a young man in a tailored suit who looked like he hadn't smiled in weeks. Without hesitation, he pressed a button on the intercom and announced, "Mr. Carter, a courier from your wife has arrived." The reply came almost instantly, deep and calm, "Send her in." My pulse skipped as the assistant opened the door for me, and I found myself walking into a vast office filled with light from floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Behind a desk, the size of my entire kitchen, sat a man whose presence filled the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored suit fitting him like armor, his face handsome but marked with a seriousness that suggested he was carrying the weight of an empire. For a moment, I forgot to breathe, realizing this wasn't just another delivery. This was the beginning of something that would change my life forever. When I stepped closer to his desk, I noticed something about him that surprised me. For a man who clearly carried so much power, he didn't look cold or unapproachable. There was this faint trace of thoughtfulness in his face, almost a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, locked onto me as though he was already trying to figure out what kind of person I was. My hands felt clammy as I placed the package on his desk and forced my voice to stay steady when I said, "I was told to give this to you directly." He took the envelope without hesitation, tore it open with the kind of urgency that told me he had been expecting something important, and when he unfolded the single sheet inside, I watched the shift in his expression, his forehead tightening, his lips pressing into a line. He read the page once, then again, his eyes scanning each word like maybe the meaning would change if he stared hard enough. Then his brows shot upward, and for a moment he looked almost boyish in his surprise, like a man who'd just been blindsided in a way he hadn't prepared for. He muttered under his breath, not really speaking to me, but almost to himself, "What is she up to?" There was confusion in his voice, but beneath it something darker, something that made me uneasy. I hadn't come here to meddle, yet I stood frozen, feeling every ounce of tension hanging in the air. Before I could stop myself, the words slipped out of me. It sounded like, "Maybe they're trying to ruin you." The second I said it, I wanted to bite my tongue. His head jerked up, his sharp eyes cutting into me as though he'd only just remembered I was standing there. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm, a demand wrapped in disbelief. My chest tightened, but instead of shutting up like I should have, I blurted out more. "I overheard your wife with someone. They were talking about stripping you of everything. And after that, they were kissing like they didn't even care who might hear." That was when his entire face changed, as if I had ripped away the last thread holding him together. The confusion drained out, replaced first by shock, then by a kind of raw pain that I wasn't prepared to see in a man like him. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened, and I caught the faintest tremor in the way he exhaled, like the betrayal had hit him straight in the chest. In that instant, I realized I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and whatever was written on that paper in his hand, paired with what I had just confessed, was about to set something unstoppable into motion. I'll never forget the way his eyes shifted in that moment, how the first wave of anger gave way to something deeper, something far more human, the raw pain of a man who had just realized his own wife had betrayed him. It was all there, written across his face, the kind of heartbreak you can't hide no matter how powerful you are. He muttered almost under his breath, "So that's it." But the sound was so heavy it made me shiver. Then his gaze fixed on me, sharp and unyielding, and I swear I felt it in my bones like I had suddenly become part of something I didn't ask for. His voice dropped lower, edged with danger but strangely controlled. "So that's what she's planning. Well, Victoria, you've brought this on yourself." He straightened in his chair, and when his eyes lingered on me again, there was a flicker of something unexpected, like my presence had sparked an idea in his mind, something wild and unformed but already taking shape. It made me want to step back, but I couldn't move, caught between fear and curiosity. Then, softer, almost gentle, he asked, "What's your name?" My throat tightened, but I managed, "Emily." He gave a short nod, and for the first time there was a strange warmth in his expression. "Emily," he said, as if testing it, "you're braver than you realize. Help me." The words hit me like a slap. "Me? You want me to help you?" My voice cracked as I took a step back, trying to understand how in the world a billionaire could possibly need anything from a delivery girl like me. It felt absurd, surreal, even dangerous. My instincts told me to say no, to run, to leave this whole thing behind, but his eyes held me there. They weren't just asking, they were pulling me into his storm. And then he smiled, not with joy, but with this glint of determination. "You see, Emily, my wife knows every single person who works in this company, every secretary, every manager, every assistant. But she doesn't know you. She'd never expect you. What I need right now is unpredictability, something that knocks her off balance, and you are exactly that." He paused, studying me in a way that made my stomach flip. "I have an important meeting today, one that decides everything, and if you stand by me, I can use that surprise to defend myself. And I'll admit," his eyes dropped briefly to my delivery uniform, then rose again with a half smile. "With the right clothes and a little polish, you could play the part more convincingly than you think." I stared at him like he had lost his mind. The words flew out before I could stop myself. "Are you serious? Do you even hear yourself? This is dangerous. What if she finds out? What if that man she's with is violent? What if I end up hurt just because I happen to show up with a package?" My voice cracked, half anger, half fear, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. The thought of being dragged into a billionaire's mess made me want to run for the elevator. But he just narrowed his eyes at me, like he was already calculating something far beyond what I could see. When I mentioned the name Brandon, his whole posture shifted. He leaned forward slightly, his expression darkening with recognition, and asked me how he looked. I shook my head quickly, explaining I hadn't seen him, that it was the housekeeper who probably knew, that she had been standing right there and had seen everything. For a moment, his face turned grim, then suddenly it cracked into this predatory smile, the kind of smile that made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. "Perfect," he murmured, almost to himself, as if I had just handed him a piece of the puzzle he had been searching for. Then his eyes came back to me, sharp but calmer now, and his voice softened, though it still carried the weight of command. I understand your fear. I won't pretend this isn't risky, but I promise you, I'll personally make sure nothing happens to you. You will be safe. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, and then his lips curved into something almost playful. And about the reward. Once we get through this, you'll have enough to chase a dream you've buried away. Tell me, Emily, have you ever been to Hawaii? The way he asked it, so casual, so confident, it almost felt like he was already holding that dream out to me. Hawaii. My throat tightened, because the truth was I had never even been out of California, never stood on a beach where the horizon stretched endless and blue. For a moment I saw it, myself standing barefoot on white sand, the ocean wind in my hair, and I hated how much I wanted it. His eyes stayed on me, calm but piercing, as if he was reading every thought flickering through my head, and against every instinct screaming for me to walk away, I felt something else begin to stir inside me, a reckless curiosity, a dangerous thrill, and the first flicker of attraction toward this man who, with just a few words, made it seem like my whole life could change. The moment I finally nodded, agreeing to step into this madness, I felt something light up inside me, a reckless spark that I couldn't quite explain. Ethan caught it immediately, and the way he gave that approving little nod made my stomach twist with both nerves and a strange kind of pride. He pressed a button on his desk and spoke into the intercom, calling for his assistant. "Jason, take our guest to a boutique, get her a business suit, the best one you can find. Then straight to a stylist, hair and makeup, she needs to be ready by 5. We're going to the board meeting." When his eyes flicked back to me, there was that faint, teasing curve in his mouth. "Just try not to break anything along the way," he added lightly, and though his tone was playful, I could hear the edge behind it. I already have one woman determined to destroy everything I've built. I caught the joke, but I also caught the pain he was trying to hide with it, and for the first time I felt a rush of empathy for this man who had seemed so untouchable when I first walked in. Jason, his assistant, appeared at the door almost immediately, his face giving away nothing except the slightest flicker of surprise that I was suddenly part of his boss's plan. Still, he gave a quick nod, efficient and practiced, and motioned for me to follow him. I hesitated just long enough to glance back, catching sight of Ethan already on the phone, his voice low and controlled as he gave orders to security about bringing the housekeeper in. The image of Mrs. Thompson's pale face flashed in my mind, and my chest tightened. She knew too much, and now she was being pulled into this storm just like me. The boutique Jason led me to was unlike anything I had ever set foot in before. The moment we stepped inside, I felt swallowed by soft lighting, velvet displays, and the faint perfume of luxury fabrics, like even the air itself was richer here. The saleswoman barely looked at me, her eyes sliding instead to Jason, and without a word she began pulling suits from racks that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. She handed them over with the kind of detached efficiency that comes from serving the wealthy every single day, never questioning, never hesitating. I slipped into a fitting room that felt bigger than my entire bedroom, and with each outfit I tried on, I felt myself transforming in ways I hadn't expected. When I finally stepped out in a deep navy suit that hugged my body in all the right places, the woman gave a small approving nod. Jason gave nothing away, but I saw it in the mirror. The way my posture shifted, the way my chin lifted without me even realizing. That cheap courier uniform that had always made me feel invisible was gone, and in its place stood a woman I barely recognized, polished, confident, powerful even. It scared me a little, how easily clothes could change not just how others saw me, but how I saw myself. And in that moment, with the weight of silk and wool on my shoulders, I realized I was no longer just running errands. I was stepping straight into a role that could change everything. The stylist's chair felt like a time machine. Hours slipped by without me noticing, while steady, practiced hands worked over my hair and face. I could smell the faint sweetness of hairspray mixing with the sharper scent of hot tools. hear the quiet hum of blow dryers, the clink of brushes being set down and picked up again. Every so often, I caught my reflection halfway through, and each time I felt like I was looking at a stranger in transition. One layer of the delivery girl stripped away, another layer of someone bolder taking her place. I sat frozen, letting them sculpt me into a version of myself I had never imagined. And when the stylist finally leaned back and said softly, "All done," I almost didn't have the courage to look. When I did, my heart skipped. The woman staring back at me in the mirror had polished waves of chestnut hair framing her face, a subtle sweep of makeup that made my eyes glimmer under the light, lips colored just enough to look powerful without being loud. There was confidence in her gaze that I hadn't seen before, elegance in the way her chin lifted. The messy courier girl I'd been that morning was gone, erased by precision and artistry, and in her place stood someone I barely recognized. Someone who could walk into a room full of billionaires and not instantly shrink. It terrified me and thrilled me all at once, and a shiver of anticipation rolled through me at the thought of how others might see me now. By the time we reached the conference center, it was close to 5. My stomach was a knot of nerves, but my new reflection had me standing taller than I ever thought possible. Ethan was already there, waiting in the marble-floored lobby in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression composed, his posture straight. But I sensed the undercurrent in him, the storm brewing behind his calm exterior. He turned as though to scan the room, and then his gaze froze in place. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the control on his face breaking for just a second. I followed the line of his sight and realized he was staring at me. Not the girl in the wrinkled FedEx jacket, but the woman walking down the broad staircase in a navy suit that fit like it had been made for me, my new hairstyle catching the light. For a heartbeat I wondered if he even recognized me, and the look that crossed his face, that flash of real, unguarded admiration, made my chest tighten. His heart, I could tell even from across the lobby, had stumbled against the moment, and mine wasn't far behind. In his eyes, I wasn't just a courier anymore. I was something entirely unexpected, and it left both of us breathless. As I reached him, I felt the weight of his eyes on me, steady and unflinching, and my nerves tangled with a kind of pride I had never known before. My fingers brushed the lapel of my jacket almost without thinking, and with a half smile that came out bolder than I intended, I asked, "Well, how do I look?" The words hung there, daring him to see me as something more than the girl who had walked into his office just hours earlier in a wrinkled delivery uniform. He let his gaze travel slowly from my shoes to my hair, and when his expression shifted into that signature smirk of his, it wasn't sharp or mocking this time. It carried warmth, even awe. "Emily," he said softly, inclining his head in that deliberate way of his, "I think I underestimated you when I asked you not to break anything. Looking like this, you might just break something far more important." His pause lingered just long enough for the meaning to sink in before he added, "Like every hope my dear wife still clings to." A flush rose in my cheeks, but I smiled back, knowing I had struck some kind of chord in him I hadn't expected. I whispered that I would do my best not to let him down, and the way he nodded, eyes locked with mine, made me believe he actually trusted me in this impossible game. "You are my surprise," he said firmly, "my secret weapon." And then, in a gesture that felt strangely intimate, he offered me his arm. The moment my hand rested there, I could feel the steadiness beneath his tailored sleeve, the heat of his skin, and I let him guide me forward, step by step, into the heart of the battle. My chest was tight with nerves, but something else was stirring too. A rush of excitement, of danger, of stepping into a story that no longer felt like it belonged to someone else. The conference room buzzed with quiet voices as we entered, the air heavy with money and power. Around the long table sat older men and women, their expressions carved in stone, their eyes sharp with expectation. At the head of it all was Victoria, her hair styled to perfection, her tailored dress radiating authority, every flick of her hand designed to remind the room she was in control. The double doors closed behind us, and all attention shifted instantly. Ethan, tall and composed, filled the doorway in his flawless suit, and next to him stood me, no longer invisible, no longer just a courier, but a woman everyone in that room would have to reckon with. The moment we stepped into that conference room, I realized something I hadn't expected. Ethan wasn't the one stealing all the attention. It was me. The air shifted, voices fell silent, and every head turned to watch us walk in. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe I'd trip or do something to give myself away. But instead, there was only that heavy, stunned quiet, like the whole room was holding its breath. Victoria's eyes found me almost instantly, and I saw her face change in real time. The polished, superior smile she had carried like armor slipped, faltered, and twisted into something rawer, something laced with confusion and jealousy. Her stare narrowed, sharp as glass, scanning me up and down as though she could unmask me just by willing it so. I could practically feel her mind racing, clawing for answers about who I was, where I came from, what threat I might pose. For a moment, I thought she might leap across the table and tear at my hair just to prove I was real. And next to me, I could sense Ethan's quiet satisfaction as he guided me to the front with steady composure, the faintest curl of a smile tugging at his mouth. He knew exactly what he was doing, and so did I. My presence alone had already tipped the balance. When he pulled out the chair for me and slid it close to his, the gesture was deliberate, intimate, undeniable. The scrape of the chair against the floor echoed in the silence, and I could feel the ripple it caused among the shareholders. Sitting beside him in that seat was a statement, one he wanted everyone, especially Victoria, to see. It was a slap without ever lifting a hand. I lowered myself into the chair, my palms damp, my breath shallow, but I lifted my chin because I understood the part I was meant to play. I wasn't just there to decorate his side. I was there to make her unravel. Victoria gathered herself quickly, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. She spoke with a forced calm that barely masked the fury trembling underneath, accusing Ethan of being out of touch, of running the company with outdated methods, of wasting resources and making reckless choices. She had her numbers ready, her arguments polished, and the way she delivered them was sharp and rehearsed, designed to sway the men and women at the table. From the corner of my eye, I watched a few heads nod, saw the flicker of agreement on faces that had once been loyal. My chest tightened, fear and adrenaline mingling, because for a moment I wondered if her lies would actually work. Victoria didn't waste time. She pulled out thick folders and glossy charts, her voice growing steadier with each word as she promised the shareholders bigger profits, higher returns, and a brighter future under her leadership alone. My husband, unfortunately, has failed to adapt to the new realities of the market, she said, her tone sharpened by triumph, as I noticed several of the older men at the table nodding along. Then her eyes cut to me, and her lips curled into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. And his questionable distractions, she said with poisonous sweetness, only pull him further away from the company's real needs. Heat rushed to my face as I realized she was pointing straight at me without ever saying my name. Her confidence rattled me in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time since this strange charade began, I wondered if I had been foolish to go along with Ethan. What if she was right? What if I was just a shiny prop in her husband's failing defense? My heart kicked hard in my chest, and I felt a cold shiver of doubt crawl down my spine. Was this all about to collapse on top of us? The smug glint in her eyes made it clear she believed she had already won. The silence in the room grew heavier as she finished her speech, every word polished, every gesture calculated, and when she finally sat back, her gaze landed on Ethan like she had delivered the final blow. I thought he might crack under the pressure, but instead he rose calmly from his chair, his expression unreadable, that faint little smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was the same smirk that had irritated her from the beginning, and I could almost see the anger flare in her eyes as he adjusted his cufflinks with a slow, deliberate motion before turning to face the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, carrying easily across the space, "my wife has spoken of questionable distractions." And I agree. Some distractions can indeed be very questionable. He let the pause stretch, letting the words settle before adding, "Sometimes they are not only questionable, but dangerous. For our business, for our future." Then, without a flicker of hesitation, he gave a subtle nod toward Jason. The lights dimmed, the projector whirred, and on the massive screen behind Ethan appeared a photograph that made the entire room inhale at once. Brandon Cole's mugshot from an old criminal case, his face frozen in the cold light of exposure. The screen flickered, and suddenly it wasn't just a mugshot anymore. Headlines flashed across the wall in bold letters: "Con man swindles dozens of wealthy widows," "International marriage scammer," "Tied to underground gambling rings." Article clippings rolled past like a parade of shame, with photos of Brandon's smug face standing beside luxury cars, slipping into casinos, his hand draped over women who looked hollowed out and betrayed. The room filled with whispers, chairs shifting, papers rustling as the weight of the evidence sank in. I didn't dare move, but I could feel the air grow colder as each revelation cut deeper. Victoria's face drained of color. She had been so sure of herself a moment ago, but now her eyes widened with a kind of horror I'll never forget. She glanced from the screen to Ethan, her lips trembling, her chest rising and falling too fast. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked into something raw and ugly. "This is a lie," she shouted, her throat straining. "I don't know this man. Ethan, you fool, you're bluffing. These are your dirty tricks." But the shareholders weren't looking at Ethan. They were staring at her, at the panic spilling through every word she tried to force out. Ethan didn't flinch. He tilted his head, the smallest curve of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Bluffing?" he repeated, his tone calm but cutting. "Allow me to convince you otherwise." He gave a quiet nod to Jason, and instantly the screen changed again. The chatter in the room stilled. A video file loaded, and then Brandon himself appeared, sitting hunched on a velvet couch in a flashy apartment that screamed of excess. The wallpaper gleamed gold, crystal glasses stood half empty on the table, but Brandon looked nothing like the confident man in the photographs. He was wrecked, his hair was disheveled, sweat glistened on his forehead, and his eyes were wide, frantic. He leaned forward toward the camera, his lips quivering as he spoke. The sound of his voice filled the room, broken and trembling, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "It's true. I was in on it with Victoria Carter. We planned to push Ethan out, to give her full control of the company. She promised me a share, promised to cover my debts." Behind him, two large men in suits stood like shadows, their presence making it clear this was no performance, no fabrication. And as the video played, Victoria's face collapsed in on itself, recognition, fear, and rage all twisting together while the room held its breath. The video ended with those final damning words, Brandon's voice trembling as he confessed, and then the camera caught the satisfied face of Ethan's head of security. "We found him, Mr. Carter. The man's rotten to the core." The screen went black, and the silence that followed was suffocating. You could feel the weight of it pressing down on every person in that room. No one moved, no one breathed. The evidence was undeniable. That silence shattered when Victoria exploded. Her face turned crimson, her eyes wild with rage, and she shot to her feet, pointing a shaking finger right at me. "You liar, Ethan!" she screamed, her voice cracking into hysteria. "And this cheap little thing you parade around beside you, do you really think these men will believe you when you flaunt your mistress at my husband's table?" The words spat out of her like venom, raw and desperate, her mask finally ripped away. She raged on, accusing him of humiliating her, of forcing her into betrayal, her voice breaking under the strain. I could feel the heat flooding my cheeks, every eye in the room turning toward me, the air thick with curiosity and judgment. Part of me wanted to shrink back into my chair, to disappear, but something stronger pushed me to my feet. My legs were trembling, but I stood tall, meeting their stares, refusing to let her paint me into the role she needed me to play. My pulse thundered in my ears, yet I forced a calm smile to my lips, the kind that carried both defiance and control. I looked straight at her, that bitter woman who had tried to destroy everything, and with a voice steady enough to surprise even myself, I said, "You won't smear me with your lies. I'm not what you call me. I'm just a courier. This morning I was the one who delivered your invitation to this circus you tried to orchestrate." My hand slipped into my bag and came out with my laminated FedEx badge, the plastic catching the light as I held it up high for everyone to see. The room stirred, whispers rising, and I saw the realization spread across her face as she finally recognized me. Not a mistress, not a threat born of her husband's power, but the very girl she had dismissed hours earlier, now standing in front of her with nothing left to hide. My voice rang sharper than I expected as I told her, "You won't smear me with your filthy lies. I'm just a courier, nothing more, and this very morning I delivered your invitation to your husband for this spectacle you've staged." Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing the soft lining of the purse until they closed around something small but solid. When I pulled it out, I held it high for everyone to see. My laminated FedEx badge, my picture, my name, the proof of who I really was. The plastic caught the light as I turned it slightly, and a ripple of murmurs swept across the room. Victoria's eyes widened as recognition dawned, and in that instant her mask cracked. Her perfect composure dissolved into raw, seething venom. Her pupils narrowed to slits, her lips pulled back, and she hissed, You worthless street girl, nothing but a delivery rat. How did you crawl in here?" The sound of her voice, dripping with contempt, was louder than any confession. She had just exposed herself to everyone in the room, her hatred and disdain laid bare for all to see. I stood tall, refusing to flinch while she trembled, red-faced and shaking, caught between fury and humiliation. Around the table the shareholders shifted, whispering among themselves, their faces lit with shock and dawning clarity. They didn't need more evidence. They had just seen the truth in her breakdown, in the way she spat on me for being exactly what she herself had relied on, the courier she had sent into this mess. The louder she screamed, the smaller she became in their eyes. And then Ethan's voice cut through the chaos, smooth but edged with triumph. "Well, my dear wife," he said, holding her gaze with an almost mocking calm, "it looks like your game is finished, and I must admit, not your finest performance." His words carried the quiet finality of a verdict, and I felt a strange thrill rush through me, because in that moment I realized I wasn't just a witness to her downfall. I had been the spark that lit it. Ethan's words hit like the closing of a heavy door. He told her calmly, almost coldly, that she had always been her own undoing, that her lies, her schemes, her constant contempt for anyone beneath her had finally caught up with her, and now everyone could see it. His voice didn't rise in anger. It cut with quiet certainty, and that was far worse. "Our marriage is finished," he said, pausing just long enough to let the room absorb it. "I'll see you in court." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the pounding of my own heartbeat. Victoria's face twisted, her mouth opening like she wanted to lash back, but nothing came. She had nothing left. Then Ethan turned from her to the shareholders, his voice lifting with authority, clear and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the truth for yourselves. I trust there's no doubt left about who cares for the future of this company, and who is willing to destroy it out of greed and selfish ambition. I propose we move immediately to re-elect the board of directors and remove anyone tied to this conspiracy." His words landed like stone, and one by one the shareholders nodded, their hands already reaching for tablets and pens, eager to distance themselves from her collapse. The tide had turned completely, and the empire she thought she could steal slipped through her fingers in plain view of everyone. I watched as Victoria shot us both one last look, her eyes blazing with hatred, her body trembling as if she might combust under the weight of it. But then, without another word, she spun on her heels and stumbled out of the room. No one followed. No one tried to stop her. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed like a final sentence. I exhaled slowly, my whole body trembling with the release of adrenaline, realizing just how close I had been to crumbling under her attacks. When the votes were counted and the room finally cleared, the silence felt strange, almost gentle. Ethan walked over to me, and before I could step back, he took my hand in his palm warm, steady, grounding. "Emily," he said, my name, spoken softly, with more tenderness than I had heard all day. The sound of it shook me, made my heart stutter. "You were extraordinary." My lips curved into a shy smile, and all I could manage was, "I only wanted to help." He squeezed my hand gently, his eyes full of something that went beyond gratitude, something that left me breathless and unsure of what would come next. Ethan looked at me then, his hand still holding mine, and said softly, "You've helped me more than you can possibly imagine. Now it's time we celebrate this victory. I think Hawaii is waiting for you." The way he said it, with that rare warmth in his voice, sent a shiver through me. From that day forward, my life was never the same. I didn't climb back onto that rattling little scooter to deliver packages in the sweltering heat or freezing rain. I didn't have to swallow my pride each time someone looked right through me in a lobby. That version of me was gone. He offered me a job in his company, something I never thought would happen in a million years. At first, I told myself it was temporary, just a way to pay bills and get my feet under me, but each day I worked by his side, the distance between us shrank. The man who had seemed untouchable the first time I saw him became someone I knew in small ways, the way his eyes tightened when he was hiding frustration, the quiet hum he made when he was deep in thought. And little by little, those professional exchanges blurred into something warmer, something that made my heart leap every time I saw his name on my phone. By the time we finally boarded that plane to Hawaii, we weren't pretending anymore. We were a couple, something real, something I had never dared to believe could be mine. I remember standing barefoot in the sand on that first evening, the ocean stretching out so wide it made me feel both tiny and infinite at once, and for the first time in my life, I let myself believe that maybe I deserved this. Not just the trip, not just the love, but the chance to live without fear, without struggle, to finally step into a life where I was more than just the girl on the scooter. Ethan's laughter blended with the crash of the waves, and for once he didn't hide behind his smirk. He let me see his heart, wide open. As for Victoria, she vanished from our world like smoke. After the divorce, no one saw her at the parties, no one whispered about her in the business pages. Her greed and envy had eaten her alive, leaving her alone, penniless, abandoned even by the man she had risked everything for. Meanwhile, I had found not only stability, but love I never thought I'd be lucky enough to touch. That's the thing about life. Sometimes it takes the ugliest betrayal to open the door to your greatest joy. And I walked right through it. And if this story touched you even a little, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Drop me a comment and tell me what you felt while listening. Maybe even share a moment from your own life that this reminded you of, and give this video a like. It means more than you know, and it keeps me going, bringing you more stories that make us feel a little less alone.